Welcome to Parisburg First United Methodist Church. Today, I'd like you to mentally, with me, leave your computer screen and take your soul out for a journey. Come to the garden alone and allow Jesus to walk with you and talk with you and tell you, I am your own. Together, as we enter this door to this church, let's find the joy and share it with others today. Come on in.
I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me I am His own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of His voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that He gave to me within my heart is ringing, and He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me I am His own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I'd stay in the garden with Him, though the night around me be falling, but He bids me go through the voice of woe. His voice to me is calling, and He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me I am His own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other hath ever known.
As we get ready to worship God and hear the Word of God spoken to us, I remind you that today is Holy Laughter Sunday. We laugh at Satan today because Christ has won. And because of that, I've had some folks in our church share some jokes with me. You know the best way to watch a fishing show? Live streaming. Do you know why the chicken crossed the road? He was practicing social distancing. We have a couple more here, and these people sent videos in. Enjoy.
Hey, Pastor Brian, why didn't Noah ever go fishing? Because he only had 2 worms.
Why did the kid eat their homework? Because the teacher said it was a piece of cake.
Ecclesiastes reminds us that it is God who gives life, wealth, and the ability to enjoy possessions. I want to say thank you to you all who've been sharing your possessions, particularly those of you all who have been using our electronic ways of sharing your gifts with us. 2 of you all this week have joined those folks who either give online or make automatic payments from your checking account to the church. Thank you. In addition to those gifts this week, our church also received a special check from Paul Bowman at the Holston Conference Foundation. Now, traditionally, Paul comes to the church with the check to hand deliver it. Well, right now, hand delivering anything is not really the best way to do it. So we got a check in the mail. But I want to remind you who Paul Bowman is. Paul Bowman came to our church a couple years ago when our playground was dedicated. And he brought the check there and watched us dedicate that playground. And it's still being used even this week for kids to play on. The Holston Conference Foundation also has one of our church funds in it, the Witten Youth Fund. Alex and Love Witten started this fund years ago for scholarships for people going to seminary and also for youth ministry in our own church. In the last 8 years, over $4,000 has been generated by that fund to go and support youth ministry, like our kids going to Resurrection and other events. The amazing part to me is 8 years later, even after paying out that money, even after watching the stock market go up and down again, there's more money there now than there was 8 years ago. The check we got this week was not for our church. It was for something you care passionately about. It was caring for the needy in our community. It was set aside to go to the food pantry at the Giles Christian Service Mission. It was there where people can get food, extra food right now when they need it the most. Today I want to say thank you. Thank you for being used by God to make a difference in our community. You are saying so much by your gifts. But guess what? You want to make a difference in our community. You want to do good. In a season of social isolation, these following words from Ecclesiastes that I often use in weddings sum up what we have learned. Humans were not designed to live alone or to work in isolation. We work best in cooperation. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, 2 are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I want to begin by reading probably what's the most familiar passage from Ecclesiastes, there is a season. This section is not about the fact that there's time for this and a time for that. It says there's a kaleidoscope of God's activities that take place around us. It's not frozen perfection that we face and we live in. There's a time for everything. It's an overall masterpiece with the work of our Creator. Hear the familiar words. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search, and a time to give up, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to mend, a time to be silent, a time to speak. A time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. You're familiar with a lot of Ecclesiastes, but I find the following words, which appear in 5 different passages throughout Ecclesiastes, to be the most meaningful section. I'm going to be reading today from Ecclesiastes chapter 2. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth, to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. We are in the midst of a quarantine, and the question is, how are you using this quarantine time? I put that question on Facebook this week. I got a couple responses back. One person said they've become quite knowledgeable about Zoom. Now, I've realized there's different levels of Zoom knowledge. Level one is, can you get on and can people see your picture and can they hear your voice? That's a good thing to know. Level two is, can you figure out how to hit the mute button so you can eat popcorn and no one hears you chomping your jaws? Now, level three, that gets a little exciting here. Can you share your screen and show people what you've been working on recently? Now, level four is what I got introduced to this week, the virtual background. You can make it so that you look like you're sitting in San Francisco or Africa or even on the flight deck of the USS Enterprise. It's all up to you. All I ask is, would you please learn enough about Zoom so that you can turn off the video and off the audio when you go use the bathroom? That's an important step. That's one way you could be using this time. I talked to somebody else recently how they were using this time alone right now, and they said they have been editing Wikipedia articles. Woo-hoo! That's just exciting, I know. And what they've been looking at is a mathematician, Peter Maurer. And Peter Maurer had done some intriguing things using sine waves and art to draw what is called the Maurer rose. A little later in our service, during our announcement time, I'll show you some pictures of Maurer rose, all sorts of different designs that come off this software. So you could become a Zoom expert. You could become an expert at Wikipedia, or maybe you've been using this time for something good. I know Rhonda Frazier's been making masks. I know some kids at the high school in their technology center have been making parts for ventilators so that Giles Community Hospital can continue to do the good work they're doing for their ventilators. I know across our nation, crime is down, somewhere between 10 and 50%. I talked to our local law enforcement agencies here in our own community, and they said, yes, we are seeing a decrease in crime as well. In fact, the only increase we have seen so far is there's been a large number of complaints about noisy neighbors. So that's part of what's going on. You can use this time for something good. Today I want us to look at the book of Ecclesiastes because I think it gives us some wisdom on how we can use this time for something good, not for something meaningless, but something that transforms us and transforms the community around us. Now, when you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, we've got to look at two terms because they help us understand what the author is trying to say. First off, he talks about the word meaningless or vanity, vanity of vanities or meaningless. What he describes here, the Hebrew word, means something that's like a breath of wind. It kind of comes and it goes. He's not talking like a tornado or anything like that that leaves destruction in its path. Just a little gust of wind. You feel it. But it really didn't make a difference in your life. It's not enough to blow a boat around the ocean. It's not enough to move a house around. It's just enough to say, well, I felt that. And nothing really happened. And he says a lot of life is like that. What we're doing is meaningless. It has no real function. It has no lasting value. The other phrase he picks up on here is under the sun. In fact, this is the only place in the Old Testament you'll find that phrase, and you'll find it 34 times, under the sun. And what he's talking about here is we can measure a lot of things scientifically. We can measure things with our minds. We can study things just like the spies went into the land of Canaan. They used all the facilities to explore the land under the sun. And the author is saying, you can use all those things. But I want to tell you about some things that you can't see under the sun exactly. I want to tell you about some things that you can't see with your own human eyes, things you can't pick up with your five senses. I want to talk to you about something deeper. I want to talk to you about what God's doing. As I mentioned already, 5 times there's a phrase that shows up in the book of Ecclesiastes. And he talks about the fact that you might as well eat, drink, and then we talked about different things there. We either work or do good or something like that, and find satisfaction. Let's talk about that word satisfaction. Satisfaction is one of the things that we should be looking for according to Ecclesiastes. Now, what he's talking about here is, you might think of St. Paul in Philippians, where Paul says, I have learned to be content, satisfied in all things, either in times of want or times of plenty. Paul understood that no matter what happens, he can be content and he can rejoice and give thanks in all things. Or perhaps you might think of Jeremiah. Jeremiah 29:11, we love that verse where God says, I know the plans I have for you. But I encourage you to back up early in that chapter where Jeremiah writes to the people of Israel and says, you are going to be quarantined in the country of Babylon for 70 years. And you thought your quarantine was a long time. And he says, during this time, I want you to plant fields. I want you to marry, to have children. I want you to give your children away in marriage. I want you to pray for the government. I want you to build houses. I want you to thrive in the land and be content, to be satisfied. In whatever situation is, the author says, now it's time to be satisfied with what you have and what's going on. He also says another powerful message to us. The second message is simply this: do you see the hand of God at work? And those who see the hand of God as the one who provides the food you eat, the drink you have, the work you have, the money you have, the family, the wealth, everything that you have, do you realize it comes from God? And when you accept the fact that it comes from God, you begin to share it. Ecclesiastes uses a word here that we attach a lot of meaning to, the word sinner. The idea is those who don't see it coming from God, or as he calls a sinner, it's someone who says, I don't see God in this. But for those of us who see God, but the one behind it, the God who's the one who provides for all our things, Ecclesiastes says it's not going to guarantee your life's longer, but it guarantees that your life is going to be better because you're going to see the hand of God and you're going to experience a lot more joy. Let's talk about how this plays out in real life for us right now. On Friday afternoon, I sat down and watched a seminar. And the whole seminar is based on the question, what happens to the church once the quarantine is over? I know. We're going to dance up and down the aisles. We're going to shout. We're going to have a grand time. The church is going to be filled with people. But he says, there's a lot of y'all going to still be 6 feet apart. You're not going to really want to shake hands and hug everybody right then, are you? You're going to be still slightly hesitant. And he gave all these great things that we as pastors might want to be thinking about ahead of time, how we might be ready for life after the quarantine. And I appreciate that. There's a lot of wisdom in thinking ahead, but I also hear the words of Ecclesiastes that says to us, let's find satisfaction in the here and now. Let's begin to ask the question, how can we find blessings? How can we be satisfied in what's taking place right here and right now and see the joy in it? Instead of focusing all our attention on what lays ahead at the end of the journey, could we enjoy the journey while we get there? Could we make the trip from here to there something we really want to enjoy, something we look back on and say, wow, God was there with us. The other part goes back to something my good friend Buddy Butler said in his Easter sermon last week from over at Rich Creek Methodist. And Buddy was saying, you know, we get up here on an Easter morning and we shout, Christ is risen. And we shout it again, Christ is risen. And we shout it again, Christ is risen. But he asked the question, do you really believe it in your heart? Do you believe that God raised Christ from the dead? He said, if we had cameras inside that tomb and you could see Christ kind of wake up, sit up halfway, take off the covering across his face, if you could see suddenly all the grave clothes fall off, and you could see Christ begin to walk out of that tomb, and you could see the stone roll away, would you believe that God raised Christ from the dead, or simply that Christ is alive? The key part for us is to believe that God is at work, and God is the one who raised up Jesus from the dead, and God will raise up all those who believe in him from the dead as well. Do we see God's hand at work? That's the question. Do we see God's hand at work? I will let you know this much. If you begin to look anywhere at all for the hand of God, you're going to suddenly discover everywhere you look, God's hand is right there. The day is going to come when someone's going to finally say the quarantine is over. And our politicians are already arguing about who has the right to say that. But I know this much, the day is going to come when the quarantine is lifted. And by the way, just for your information, this is not the first quarantine the world has had to face. In the 1300s, the quarantine was a word that was coined to express the 40-day period that ships had to stand off of the coast when they came to Italy. And they had to wait 40 days to make sure there was no black plague on board. Interesting enough, it took 37 days for people to begin to experience the black plague. And after the 40 days, they were declared to be clean. And I ask you, at the end of 40 days, what people say about you? How did you use this quarantine time? Did you use it for something good? Did you paint a room? Did you grow a garden? Did you apply for a class? Did you do something to change your life? Did you make a bunch of puzzles? Did you read some books? Did you watch Netflix until your eyes fall out? Most importantly, did you look around and realize that we find our true satisfaction not on meaningless activities, but did you find that our truest satisfaction is realizing everything we have comes from God, and he has given us work to do, and he has given us food and drink, and that's where we find our satisfaction. And do we see the hand of God working all around us? That's the question. I look forward to that day. I'm curious to see how it's going to be for you when you tell your grandchildren how you survived the quarantine of 2020 and what you told them about what God did in your life. Amen. As I mentioned during this sermon, you're seeing pictures now of the Mowers Rose, a geographical design. Here are these announcements, though. I wanted to say I am very excited today to announce the very beginning of a children's Sunday school class Zoom meeting. Our first one takes place today at 11 a.m. Deanne and Amy are leading it today, and the link was in today's church email. Second, I want to rejoice that Tuesday night our meals for seniors come back once again. This week we had a gift given to the church of food so that we have enough money to buy pizza for you all, salads, and a dessert. This is for any senior citizen in our church family. All you have to do is contact Sandy Peters or myself before Tuesday afternoon and you'll get a meal. I want to say Carolyn Hicks, our nursery director, has been working this week. And you're saying, why is she here? Because she is doing great things. No, she didn't have any kids she's watching. But what she's been doing is going into our church nursery and giving it that deep clean to make sure it's completely safe for those who come in once again. I also want to mention this. I know some of you are using the quarantine of 2020 to clean your homes. And as you do that, you discover there's a lot of things that are unwanted. Well, we've got a place for that stuff. We're going to have a youth yard sale in August, and you can bring those items by the church, and we'll add them to that stack. Bring them on by. In the meantime, God be with you. Amen.
Shackled by a heavy burden, 'neath a load of guilt and shame, then the hand of Jesus touched me, and now I am no longer the same. He touched me, oh, He touched me, and oh, the joy that floods my soul. Something happened, and now I know He touched me and made me whole. Since I met this blessed Savior, since He cleansed and made me whole, I will never cease to praise Him. I'll shout it while eternity rolls. He touched me, oh, He touched me, and oh, the joy